Well, hello, welcome to this introduction to Shakespeare's sonnets. Pretty exciting stuff, you guys. This will get you prepared for analyzing a sonnet, which we'll get into on the next lesson. Woo. All right, so we've already talked about why we look at poetry, and it seems like a frivolous, useless thing to a lot of people, but as we have talked about before, poetry can help us to learn about the world and to see the world on a deeper level, and to connect with other people and try to understand where other people are coming from. And of course, to let us get in touch with our own thoughts and emotions. So lots of reasons to look at poetry in general, but sonnets, a particular type of poem. Why? Why would we do this to ourselves? All right, so sonnets can do a number of things for us. So first, they can expose us to a wide variety of poetry, concepts, and terminology. Including rhyme, rhythm, meter, quatrain, iambic pentameter, rhyme scheme, figurative language, extended metaphors, volta, a fun word, theme, and structure, in addition to lots of other things. So if you get into sonnets, you're going to be exposed to all of this terminology that will be useful for you as you look at other types of poems and other literature in general. So it's a good way to get into those concepts and that terminology. So with that, sonnets expose us to some foundational or basic literary analysis tools. So looking at sonnets can help us look at other types of literature and to use those concepts and terminology in doing that. Now, sonnets, unlike some types of poetry, they follow rules. Now, sometimes when people look at poetry and it looks like it's all over the place, and some poetry is definitely like that, but sonnets follow some very particular rules. And this can help some people to be able to analyze this type of poetry. So poetry with a strict form and structure can be less intimidating than free verse for some people. Now, if you know the rules, then you can more readily analyze the poem, and because some of those rules will actually help you to analyze the poem. Now, if you can understand a sonnet, especially Shakespeare sonnets, you will be able to understand a wide range of poems and other literatures. So it's a good kind of introduction in a sense, even though sonnets can be really difficult to analyze. It's a good way to start. And if you can do sonnets, boy, you can jump into lots of different other types of poetry analysis. So there's that. Now, we're going to be looking at Shakespeare's sonnets in particular. There are lots of different types of sonnets. We're just going to be looking particularly at Shakespeare. Now, we've already talked about why we look at Shakespeare. He has invented lots of words and phrases in the English language. He has contributed to our language in general, and he's provided a model for lots of people in drama, poetry, literature. There are lots of reasons for us to look at Shakespeare. We talked about that before, so we're not going to get into that again. So why his sonnets? Now, we're going to be looking at Romeo and Juliet. And throughout high school, you're going to be looking at Shakespeare. So looking at sonnets gets you used to the language, because the language is kind of weird, that Shakespeare uses in his plays, and it can help you to be able to look at and listen to the plays and be able to say, oh, okay, I understand that language, and it makes some sense to me. This is a good start. Now, there are sonnets in Romeo and Juliet, and we will be, now some of you will be reading and watching Romeo and Juliet, and others of us will just be watching it. Now, if we were in class, in the classroom, we would be actually performing it. But as you can imagine, that's going to be difficult for us to do online. So we're going to switch things up a little bit. But there are sonnets in Romeo and Juliet, and we're going to look for those. Now, sonnets deal with deep and universal issues and themes such as love, loss, death, time, other things like guilt and anger and confusion. All of these ideas, getting into these types of ideas can help us understand the world on a different, deeper level. Now, I know many of you just want to go pay your taxes and go about your daily life, but I hope we don't forget about beauty and love and words and language and all the other things in life besides just paying our taxes. So this will be one of those things. Now, the Shakespearean sonnet is a classic form that you should be familiar with just to exist in the universe today. Knowing about things that have happened in the past, of course, and forms of literature that have been popular in the past is helpful for us to understand the present and hopefully even the future. All right, here's some stuff about sonnets in general. Now, once again, I hope you're taking some notes here because some of this information will be useful for you when you take a look at the quiz. So hopefully you're taking some notes. If you haven't been, you may want to stop the video now and go back and start taking a few just on some of these basic concepts. Now, the word sonnet is derived from the Italian word sonetto. Now it means little song or small lyric. And there he is, Chicken Little, singing a song. So you can think of Chicken Little. The sonnets, now whether or not they were initially, people were singing sonnets, this is quite possible. But once we got to Shakespeare's time, it's quite possible that they weren't being sung, if they ever were. Now, in poetry, a sonnet has 14 lines. This should not be a surprise to you. We've talked about this before. This has been in your vocabulary list. So 14 lines. It's written in Iambic Pentameter. That should also be familiar to you since we talked about that before the break. Which means, of course, that each line has 10 syllables because we have 5 iambs per line. Can you guys hear my cat running back and forth? She loves sonnets. A sonnet has a specific rhyme scheme. Oh, I did that too quickly, so we're going to go back here. Specific rhyme scheme and a volta. A volta is a turn or change in mood or emotion. So think of a volta as a shift or a change. So once again, specific rhyme scheme, a volta, written in Iambic Pentameter, and it has 14 lines. So those are some of the basics of sonnets in general. Sonnets in general. All right, so let's just talk briefly about types of sonnets. Sonnets are divided into different groups based on their rhyme scheme. 6 major types. The Italian sonnet, which was kind of the first type of sonnet, also called a Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarch was a guy who wrote, guess what, sonnets? Here we have Shakespeare, though. Because there's also the Shakespearean sonnet. Now, the Shakespearean sonnet is also called the English sonnet or the Elizabethan sonnet. Of course, Shakespeare was English, and he wrote in the Elizabethan time frame or era. We also have the Spenserian sonnet, the Miltonic sonnet, the terza rima sonnet. That could be terza rima, by the way, and the Curtal sonnet. Now, when we're looking at the rhyme scheme in an English sonnet, which is what we're going to be looking at, also called the Shakespearean sonnet, it's ABAB / CD CD EFEF/GG. This is the rhyme scheme that you're going to be paying attention to when we're looking at Shakespearean sonnets. Now, of course, in the Italian sonnet, we have this other rhyme scheme here. We say ABBA/ABBA/CDE/CDE. But this is the one we're really going to be focusing on. And this is the one, by the way, you should probably put in your notes. And remember, this is the rhyme scheme for the Shakespearean sonnet. And there he is, once again, writing some sonnets. All right. Now, we've talked about this, but I find that repetition helps you guys remember stuff. So the Shakespearean sonnet is called the Elizabethan sonnet, or an English sonnet. Introduced in England in the 16th century. Recall that the 16th century occurred during the Renaissance. Now, from about 1591 to 1604, Shakespeare wrote at least 154 sonnets. We say at least because it's very possible that he wrote lots more that did not get published. You know, I write a lot of bad poetry that no one's ever seen. I'm not saying that Shakespeare ever wrote bad poetry, but it's very possible. So we know of 154, so at least. Now, excuse me. Unlike his plays, Shakespeare's sonnets adhere to a rigorous poetic structure. And a rigorous poetic structure was first established by the Italian poet Petrarch. Now, Petrarchian poets, sonnets, also follow a rigorous poetic structure, but is different from the one we find in Shakespeare's sonnets. Now, this is a very strict structure, but the themes that are dealing with are often a little deeper and not quite as structured. So we can deal with themes such as love, loss, jealousy, anger, guilt, confusion, all of these things in a very structured poem. And there he is dancing. Now, this strict poetic form or structure was very popular during Shakespeare's lifetime. Now, in a general sense, sonnets engage images and sounds to present an argument to the reader. Now, it's kind of weird to think of a poem as an argument, but many of Shakespeare's sonnets can be broken down that way. We can also see sonnets as solving a problem or answering a question. So it has a logical structure from beginning to end, from kind of an introduction down to a conclusion. Now, Shakespeare had muses for his sonnets. You might recall that a muse is an inspiration for art. So in this case, a muse is an inspiration for poetry. For Shakespeare, we can identify people as muses. So we can see that the poems are thought to be addressed to one of three different characters: the fair youth, the dark lady, or possibly a rival poet. So this is where you might be taking some notes here as far as what, or who, I should say, Shakespeare's muses may have been. It's important to recognize that these muses may or may not have been real people. We need to be careful about saying that, oh, Shakespeare wrote about this person or that person, therefore this relationship existed. That might be the case. These relationships might have existed, but we don't know. And we need to be careful about this with poetry in general, that just because a poet is talking about something or someone, it doesn't mean that that's autobiographical. I know I write many poems about stories and situations and people that are completely fictional, and we need to keep that in mind as a possibility. However, it may be the case that some of these ideas and relationships are in fact autobiographical. We just don't know for sure. Now, you can identify a poem as Shakespearean, that is English or Elizabethan, sonnet if it has certain characteristics. So let's look at some of those characteristics. All right, so some of this is kind of a review, but again, a little review is a good way to remember stuff. So here are some characteristics of Shakespeare sonnets. Once again, 14 lines long, count them. If there aren't 14 lines, I'm only familiar with one of Shakespeare's sonnets that doesn't have 14 lines, and I suspect that it just reflects that it was incomplete. But take a look at it. If it's got 14 lines, ooh, there's a good sign. My cat has jumped on the desk. We'll see what happens here. Now, his sonnets may consist of 14 lines. They can be broken down into 4 sections, 3 quatrains, and a couplet. Now, you might recall, of course, that a quatrain is a 4-line scheme or stanza in poetry, while a couplet is a 2-line scheme. Quatrain, 4, couplet, 2. So we've got 14 lines, and we can break those down into 4 sections, 3 quatrains, and a couplet. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. All right, so here we have our very familiar by now sonnet number 18, and I've broken this down into its sections. So we see, first of all, that there are 14 lines. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Would I lie to you? And then, of course, we've got 3 quatrains and 1 couplet. So here's the first quatrain. See that that's 4 lines. Here's the second quatrain. 4 lines, the third quatrain, another 4 lines, and the final couplet, which is 2 lines. And if you've noticed that there's a rhyme scheme in the poem, you definitely are onto something. But here's the very basic structure of one of Shakespeare's sonnets, dividing into 3 quatrains and a final couplet. All right, so here we are talking a little bit more about the characteristics of Shakespeare's sonnets. Now, we already said it has a strict rhyme scheme, and we've already talked about this rhyme scheme. And in a line of text, you would represent that rhyme scheme like this: A, B, A, B, / C, D, C, D, / E, F, E, F, / G, G. Now, note that these slashes signify the different distinct sections in the poem and also in the rhyme scheme. Almost Shakespeare sonnets have this strict rhyme scheme. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. And as we've mentioned, the first 3 quatrains contain 4 lines each and use an alternating rhyme scheme. That means every other line within a quatrain rhymes. And then the final section consists of just 2 lines, and those 2 lines, you may recall, that's called the couplet. They rhyme with each other. So, once again, remember this rhyme scheme. Let's take a look. All right, so here is our sonnet number 18. So, I have divided this sonnet into its sections. So once again, I've got the first quatrain, the second quatrain, the third quatrain, and the final couplet. And you can see over here on the side here where I've labeled the lines. I've labeled the lines according to the rhyme scheme. So we see in the first section, we have a rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B. This means that line A rhymes with this line A, this line rhymes with this line. And then going on to the second section, we have an alternating rhyme scheme. So again, A rhymes with A, B rhymes with B, C rhymes with C, D rhymes with D, etc. Now, We've talked about this before when we were going over our vocabulary list. Forgot to mention the same alternating rhyme scheme down here, but your couplet, those two last lines in the couplet rhyme with each other, and we say GG for that, and that's kind of fun. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. That's the rhyme scheme. Okay, now we see that day rhymes with may, we see that temperate rhymes with date, but as we've talked about before, temperate and date, that seems like kind of an approximate rhyme. And you might find this in sonnets where the rhyming is really close. And one of the reasons for that is that people pronounce things differently back in the 17th century than they do now. So sonnets are a really good clue as to how people used to talk in England. So it might have been temperate date, temperate date, temperate dit. I'm not sure exactly how those were pronounced, but very likely is that they used to rhyme better. So we've got shines and declines, we've got dimmed and trimmed, we've got fade with shade, we have oast with grossed, and of course C and thee. So a very strict rhyme scheme here. So you can see how that plays out in our very favorite Sonnet 18. All right, here's some more characteristics. We know some of this because we've already talked about it. They're written in Iambic Pentameter. As you recall, Iambic Pentameter is a poetic meter with 10 beats or syllables, you can say beats or syllables per line, made up of alternating unstressed and stressed syllables. And of course, Iambic Pentameter starts with an unstressed syllable and is followed by a stressed syllable. You remember this, the beating of the heart, where that first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. You recall that an iamb is a metrical foot consisting of one short or unstressed syllable followed by one or stressed syllable. And once again, like the beating of a heart, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And you probably recall that pentameter is a rhythm in poetry that has 5 stressed syllables in each line. It also has 5 unstressed syllables, if you were paying attention. Now, sonnets contain a volta. A volta, this is an important word for the quiz, by the way. A volta is a shift or turn in emotion or mood. And this is something that happens toward the end of a sonnet, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into analyzing a sonnet. But we're looking for a volta, and this is where we start to feel a change in the poem itself. Once again, a volta. Okay, so these are characteristics of Shakespeare's sonnets. Now, we talked about Iambic Pentameter, and you may recall when we looked at Iambic Pentameter that we can mark a poem's rhythm using diacritical marks. Diacritical marks. See if you can remember that. What was the name of this mark? It was called the breve. Yes, that's right, the breve. Remember, it looks like a little U, and you can think of the U as an unstressed syllable. So the breve is that unstressed syllable. And then, do you guys remember what this was called? This little mark here? This was called the ictus, and that shows a stressed syllable. So if we were to read this according to the stressed and unstressed syllables, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? We can hear that iambic pentameter. We can see that this line consists of 10 syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 syllables. We have 5 iambs per line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that is the case for every line in the sonnet. So let's go ahead and just read this first quatrain. This first quatrain also shown here. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath all too short a date. You get a sense for that rhythm, that iambic pentameter. Hey, you guys, here's a fun fact. As you look at a poem and you try to figure out where the stressed and unstressed syllables are, this is called scansion. The act of scanning a poem to determine its rhythm or meter is called scansion, and that's just what we did here. And so we can go through and figure out if something is an iambic pentameter by reading it a few times and getting a sense for its rhythm. Da 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 da. All right, so that gives you a feel for what the iambic pentameter meter sounds like in this poem. And of course, we've shown what that looks like with these diacritical marks. Once again, the breve and the ictus. And we've just done some scansion here. So there we are. All right, now we are officially at the end of this video. Our next video will be about how to analyze a Shakespearean sonnet. So we're going to use all of the information that we just learned and then add some more stuff to it so we can actually get into analyzing a sonnet. So now you're going to go ahead and take the quiz on the introduction to sonnets, and then after you do that, then you can get into the next video and assignment quiz, and we will get into how to analyze a Shakespearean sonnet.